They say children are like open windows, unlatched, swinging in the breeze, inviting in whatever wanders through the dark. For years, I told myself that the man I heard breathing in the corner of my room was just the house settling. I told myself that the cold hand on my ankle was a trick of the draft. But I'm a woman now, and I know better. The windows never closed. They're still wide open, and the things that crawl through them now, some of them don't have faces. I grew up in a neighborhood of long shadows and narrow houses at the far southern end of Timișoara. My mother worked 2 jobs, which meant my childhood was spent largely in the company of Andrea. Andrea lived 3 doors down. She was a woman who seemed to be made of grey wool and dried flowers. She wasn't unkind, but she was hollow. She moved through her apartment with a silence that felt heavy, as if she were afraid that a heavy footfall might break the fragile air. Her house smelled of rosewater and something sharper, something like old copper coins. There were lace doilies on every surface, pinned down by heavy glass ashtrays, even though she didn't smoke. It was a house waiting for something that had already left. I was 7 the first time I stayed overnight. My mother had a double shift at the hospital, and Andrea had prepared the blue room for me. It was a small, cramped space on the 2nd floor. The wallpaper was a faded floral pattern that looked, in the dim light, like 1,000 tiny eyes watching me retreat under the covers. "Sleep well, kiddo," Andrea whispered, her hand lingering on the light switch. Her eyes darted toward the empty corner of the room, just for a second, before she clicked the room into darkness. I lay there, the silence pressing against my eardrums. You know that silence? The kind that feels like it's vibrating? Then I heard it. It sounded like fingernails on the floorboards. At first, I thought it was a mouse. I pulled the duvet up to my chin, my heart thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs. But then, the sound changed. It wasn't a scratch anymore. It was a breath, a long, wet, rattling intake of air. It came from the foot of the bed. I froze. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My throat felt like it had been swallowed by ice. In the pale moonlight filtering through the moth-eaten curtains, I saw the silhouette of a man sitting in the wicker chair by the window. He was slumped. His head hung at an angle that looked wrong. His chin was pressed deep into his chest, and his arms hung limp at his sides, the fingers brushing the carpet. "Andrea?" he whispered. The voice didn't sound like a human voice. It sounded like wind howling through a cracked pipe. It was thin, desperate, and cold. "Andrea, I'm still heavy. Why am I still so heavy?" I squeezed my eyes shut so hard I saw sparks. I stayed like that for hours, paralyzed, until the sun began to bleed through the fabric of the curtains. When I finally looked, the chair was empty. The sleepovers became a regular occurrence, and so did he. I learned the geography of his presence. He wasn't always in the chair. Sometimes I would wake up and feel the mattress sink behind me as if someone had sat down on the edge of the bed. I would feel the sudden plummeting drop in temperature, the kind of cold that feels like it's stealing the marrow from your bones. I started to feel comfortable in his presence. I wasn't afraid anymore. Once I felt a hand. It wasn't a solid hand. It felt like a layer of static electricity, a tingling, numbing pressure that started at my shoulder and drifted down my arm. And always the whispering. "Tell her I can't get out. Tell her the water is cold." I tried to tell Andrea once, We were sitting at her kitchen table, eating buttered toast. I asked her, "Who is the man in the blue room?" Andrea's teacup stopped halfway to her mouth. She didn't look at me. She stared at a spot on the wall behind my head, her face turning a sickly, translucent white. "There is no one in this house but us, kiddo," she said. Her voice was flat, but her hand was shaking so violently that tea splashed onto the lace tablecloth. "Don't ever mention him again. Some things grow if you give them names." I wanted to push further, to tell her that I wasn't just mentioning him. I was breathing the same stale air he was. But the look in her eyes stopped me. It wasn't just fear. It was a desperate, pleading recognition. In that heavy silence, I realized she wasn't protecting me from the truth. She was protecting the truth from being disturbed. I lowered my head and watched a single drop of tea soak into the white lace, spreading like a brown, necrotic bloom. I let the subject drop, burying it deep under a layer of childhood obedience. But as I sat there in the stifling heat of her kitchen, I felt a sudden, icy draft sweep across my ankles. It felt like a greeting. From that day on, I stopped being a guest in that house and became a witness, a silent partner in a haunting that was only just beginning to find its voice. Years passed. I grew up, moved away, and tried to bury the memories of the blue room under the mundane stresses of adulthood. But the open window didn't close. If anything, the latch had broken entirely. I started seeing them everywhere. The woman in the grocery store with the bruised neck who disappeared when I blinked. The child in the park who stood perfectly still while other kids ran through him. I realized then that the man at Andrea's hadn't been a nightmare. He had been a debut. When Andrea passed away last year, I went to her funeral. It was a small, bleak affair. Afterward, I met her sister, a woman named Magda, who was cleaning out the house. We stood in that same kitchen, the smell of copper and roses still lingering. "She was a lonely soul," Magda said, folding a lace doily. "Ever since—"
Jon? Jon?
I asked, the name tasting like ash in my mouth. Magda sighed. Her fiancé. "It's the tragedy of this house, really. He was a brilliant man, but the darkness got hold of him. Depression is a thief. He took his own life in the upstairs bedroom, the blue room. He used a heavy silk cord from the curtains. Andrea found him the next morning. She never changed a thing in that room. She thought if she kept it exactly as it was, he'd stay." I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. "I'm still heavy. Why am I still so heavy?" "He was so young," Magda continued, oblivious to my terror. "But toward the end, he kept saying he felt like he was already dead, like he was a ghost haunting his own life. Knowing the truth didn't bring me peace. It only validated the horror. Because now
I don't just hear Jon.
I live in a world where the veil is shredded. I see the others every day. They are the stains on the ceiling that move when you aren't looking. They are the voices in the white noise of the television. There are experiences I've had since then, scary ones, foul ones, that I cannot tell you. Not because I don't want to, but because some things are so necrotic, so deeply wrong, that speaking them aloud gives them a shape. I've seen things in the corners of my own bedroom
that make Jon look like a pleasant memory.
I've seen entities with elongated limbs that crawl across the ceiling, dripping a black viscous fluid that smells like rotting meat. I've heard voices that don't ask for Andrea, but call for me. They know I can see them. They know the window is open. Sometimes I'm lying in bed, not in the blue room, but in my own home, miles away, and I feel that familiar sink in the mattress. I feel the static electricity touch of a hand that hasn't felt warmth in decades, and I realize Andrea didn't just babysit me. She introduced me to the audience that will follow me to my grave. So, if you're listening to this in the dark and you feel a sudden chill, or if you think you see a shadow move in the corner of your eye that doesn't belong to any furniture, don't look. Because once they know you can see them, they never, ever leave.